Why did two drastically different Navi rosters succeed at winning a major trophy and the ones in between did not? Why, in the pursuit of greatness, they failed to do good? Everybody, let's do some corner pages. Whenever people start theory crafting on the HLTV forum about their dream team, they focus on stats, roles, and nationalities. I'm gonna be honest. I'm also guilty of that. I do the same thing with my Baltic Dream roster. But a thing that is often being forgotten is that Counter Strike is a team based game, which means that if the chemistry is not there, even a talented roster might reach a ceiling effect. The book, The Intelligence Trap, mentions prime examples of situations where stacking skill in a team oriented environment like business, research groups, and sports does not guarantee better results. I'll tell you even more. Um, Having too many highly skilled people might be the main cause of failure and loss. Why? Well, often the cause is the status conflict. The high power members can be less focused on the task itself and be more interested in asserting their authority in the group and determining who would become the top dog. Multiple studies showed that humans cannot separate the analytical, the conscious mental activities from their social environment. This means that the way we feel about the actions of individuals that surround us, that has an influence on how much brain power we can use. So a brilliant but arrogant team member may hurt both the collective and individual intelligence of his or her more sensitive colleagues, which will reduce their productivity across the board. We can expect to experience work environment conflicts, and we are ready to tolerate them, but to a certain degree. If investing mental energy to battle them noticeably improves the results, we'll be okay with it. But if we gotta spend a lot of resources and the results are poor, well, then changes should be expected. Let's talk about what kind of influence work environment conflicts can have. Scientific research has showed that sports teams benefit from having a few stars, but the balance tips at about 50-60%. That was seen in team oriented sports like basketball, football, and hockey. In a more individual performance focused game like baseball, it was not present. Too famous, too important, too rich, too high and mighty, those are the qualities and mindset that success can develop. These characteristics can encourage competition inside of the team and can cause the delusion of preparedness. I would highly recommend reading this chapter since there are so many cool examples of this, including the story of how during Euro 2016, Iceland won against England, a team composed almost entirely of players from the world's top 20 elite clubs. Or, for example, Miracle on Ice, when during the 1980 Winter Olympics, American college students beat the accomplished Soviet hockey team. The history of sports is full of surprising twists, and it really adds points to the phrase that less talent becomes more. So, when it comes to Counter Strike, how does one figure out the balance between skill and the ego? Unfortunately, we don't really yet have books dedicated to specifically Counter Strike, but I have this thing that I've been brewing for a few months in my head. The easiest way for me to explain this balance is by theory crafting on how a team is being built. To make it a little bit less complicated, we'll focus on the skills and we'll imagine that we live in a perfect world where we all speak the same language and we have no visa issues. Okay? Okay, so our first urge while building a team is to pick a bunch of highly skilled players. That might result in us spending a lot of time on figuring out who and in which roles we need. And nowadays, if we're gonna go for tier one players, that would require us to have a lot of money. Okay, so we spend the time, we spend the money, we got the players that are really good. If one would put them on the skill spectrum, that would be placed high. But for some reason, the team is not working out. Why is it like that? Well, when it comes to a team based game, it's not just about the skill. It's not just about the aim, tactical skills, knowledge of strategies, play style flexibility, and their ability of handling nerves. It's also about how the players act and react outside of the game, on how they work in a team environment, and how their actions and mindset influences the team's dynamics and chemistry. So, while building our dream team, we were focusing only on the players' in game skill and totally ignored how good or bad their interpersonal skills are. This is where we would discover that the team's average interpersonal skill level is not good. So, does it mean that if a player's game skill is high, but his interpersonal skill is below average, they're doomed? Huh, no, no, no. No, they're not. They're in the same situation as a player who maxed out their interpersonal skill but played the game on a below than average level. A team can tolerate both the lack of in game and interpersonal skill, but only if the opposing skill does the compensation. But wait, is there a way of how we can visualize this in one single graph? Yes, yes, there's a way. Let me show you this one. According to this graph, the higher the player's in game related skills are, the more their colleagues will tolerate the person's personality quirks. Also, when a player is good at interpersonal relationships, the requirement for the in game skill level will be more forgiving. So in the yellow zone would put players who are either higher than average but not extraordinary at both skills, or those who mastered one of the skills but are average at the opposite one, which makes them either not skillful enough to keep or too tricky to work with. An example of players that are masters of one skill but not the other are Simple and Jax. The ideal teammate has a great attitude and amazing gaming skill. Those kind of players will be put in the green zone. You know, like Zaivu, Monazi, Frozen, Keisirado. The third is the orange zone, where the players who are either average at both skills or those who mastered one of the skills but are below average in the opposite one. This is the zone of players who don't get permanent offers and usually get picked up when a team needs a sub. The fitting examples would be Nadusefix and Smuya. The last zone is red, and that's where one would put their cool childhood friend who's a silver, or a player who's incredibly talented and is extremely antisocial. Problems in a team may occur when players have drastically different priorities for skills. Older players and players from the CIS region are more numb to tougher interactions, while players who are from Europe or who are young, they tend to be more influenced by a toxic environment. You know, boiling water softens a potato and hardens an egg. So the same heat of work environment conflicts can have a different influence on different players. This means that the ratio between in game and interpersonal skills can shift depending on generations and regions. So, while the ratio for a team of young CIS players or a mature European team might still be 1 to 1, the ratio for the zones for teams that function or maybe wish to function like a mature CIS or a young European team will be drastically different. This means that when a team is trying to figure out who's the problem, they first need to figure out their values. Because, I mean, if the team is convinced that they are functioning like a mature, tough interactions team, they might mislabel their weakest link in the chain. This gives a great explanation why Navi worked so well during their 2021 era. They had players in the green zone of a mature CIS team. Everyone had high skill level, so that had the most influence on their chemistry. When they implemented NPL, they still used the same values, so even though he had a good attitude, his skill level was not up to their standards. So this caused frustrations both for him and his teammates. Interestingly enough, his attitude and skill would probably put him either in the green zone or at least close enough for a young European team. The reason why the current Navi roster is doing so good is because all of their players are in the green zone of a young European team. When they were just brought in, the players were not in those zones, since even Blade himself said that originally the players were not tier 1 and that it was all about their potential. Let me give you a short explanation of that potential. No one will argue that Blade is one of the best coaches in CS. He spent thousands and thousands of hours playing the game professionally, and then he switched to coaching. This means that he can fill in the gaps in knowledge, which would give his players points into the in game skill. And while he basically has a PhD in CS, he's not an expert in interpersonal skills. Obviously, due to his maturity, he understands many things, but not all of the little details. This means that in the process of becoming better at the game, the player's ego could be stealing those points from the interpersonal department and putting them into the in game related skill one. This can sabotage a roster if they are still planning to function as a young European team. That's where Ursula, novice performance coach, comes in. That is her field of expertise. So while Blade is sharpening a player's mind, she makes sure that their egos stay under control and don't start cutting everyone around. The shift can happen to anyone because it is in human nature for confidence to move our ego from the imposter to the armchair quarterback syndrome zone. And even though nature has made us intolerant to change, we still have the capacity to change our nature. Ursula provides tools to the players, which will help them to not move from the high interpersonal skill zone. She cannot force the players to use them, but the potential that Blade mentioned in the HLTV interview is the roster's openness and eagerness to the idea of improving, or at least maintaining, both of the skills. By the way, I have bad news for those who are trying to build teams in 2024 and 2025 based on this ratio. You're going to have a hard time finding young players who have the same vision. Well, the live patch of the 2020s dropped a few years ago, so some things that were acceptable in 2004 are not okay today. So even players from regions that are slow at implementing the new patch in their IRL society, those players are passively patching through consuming global media and through playing and interacting on Faceit with players from other regions. So there are less and less players who are seeing this as an optimal ratio. They prefer something like this. This means that people with that vision have two options. They can try to create something like an iron curtain in their CS scene, but I would highly disencourage to do so. COVID showed us what happens when regions get forcefully separated. So if you don't want to destroy your scene, don't do it. The second one is try to change a little bit. You don't need to change all of your views on life, but maybe at least consider changing habits that might give you more options in your career. Habits deliver numerous benefits, but the downside is that they can lock us into our previous patterns of thinking and acting, even when the world is shifting around us. Life is constantly changing, so you need to periodically check in to see if your old habits and beliefs are still serving you. A lack of self awareness is poison, and reflection and review is the antidote. So, yeah, don't be bitter, just get better. If you cannot get better, get less bitter. Which teams do you think lack in game skill points and which need more chemistry? Also, are there any books you'd recommend me to check out? I'm eager to see your answers to these questions and I'm curious to know what you think about this topic. You can write it down in the comments. In the description of the video, I've added a link to my book list. Okay, so good luck in your battle against your inner demons, and see you in the next chapter. In the yellow zone, in the yellow zone, in the yellow,